My husband didn't just cast me out, he sold me. Like a lame horse or a barren cow, he led me deep into the Arizona canyons and traded me to an Apache warband. He traded his wife of 7 years for peace, for profit, for the right to run his cattle across their land without getting an arrow in the back of one of his ranch hands. He left me in the dust, a gift to a man whose name was a curse in our town, the ruthless war chief Chayton. He looked at me one last time, his eyes as cold and pale as a winter sky, and he told me my life finally had a purpose. My purpose was to be the price of his legacy. He turned his horse and rode away. He didn't look back. And as I stood there, alone in a stone ravine that felt like an open grave, I heard the soft tread of moccasins on rock. They were coming for me. This is the story of how that man, my husband, made the biggest mistake of his life. Because he thought he was trading a broken woman. He had no idea he was unleashing a reckoning. The silence in our home had been a living thing. For 7 years, it was thicker than the adobe walls, heavier than the rough-hewn furniture my husband, Daxton Hayes, had built with his own 2 hands. It was a silence that screamed my failure from every corner. Daxton was a man made of the Arizona dust itself, hard jaw, broad shoulders, and an ambition that burned hotter than the midday sun. He owned the Double H, the biggest cattle ranch in the territory, and the town of Redemption huddled in its shadow. He had built an empire from grit and sweat. But an empire needs an heir, a son to carry the Hayes name, a son to inherit the land, the cattle, the power. And I, Nina Hayes, was a beautiful but barren field. Lord, how I had tried. I'd prayed on the splintered floorboards of the town chapel until my knees were raw. I'd secretly visited an old Mexican woman on the edge of town, a woman they called a bruja, a witch. She'd given me bitter teas, foul-smelling herbs that promised to quicken the womb. They only ever left me sick and more hollow than before. Each month was a fresh grief, a private funeral for a child that would never be. Daxton met each failure with another layer of icy disappointment. The town's women were just as cruel in their own way. Their pity felt like a knife's edge. Poor Nina, they'd whisper behind their hands at the general store, their own children clinging to their skirts. Such a tragedy. They saw me as a flawed vessel, a porcelain doll with a fatal crack running right through its core. The pressure got worse with every season. The Apache, starved and pushed from their lands, were getting bolder. Raids on homesteads were becoming more common. The tension in Redemption was a bowstring pulled taut, and Daxton's temper frayed right along with it. His obsession with a son became tangled up with his fear of losing it all. An Apache arrow could end his life, but a son would make him immortal. The final verdict came on a Tuesday. The sun was a white-hot eye in the sky, a judgment. Dr. Abernathy came out to the ranch. He was an old man who smelled of carbolic soap and cheap whiskey, and his eyes were tired of the world. He examined me in the dim light of our bedroom. It was brief. It was humiliating. Then he went into the parlor to deliver his sentence to Daxton. I pressed my ear to the door, my heart beating like a trapped bird against my ribs. I heard the doctor's gravelly voice. "It's a barren womb, Daxton. Some women are just fallow ground. I've seen it before. You could plow this field for another 20 years and never see a single sprout." Fallow ground. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the simmering silence of disappointment. It was the cold, absolute silence of a closed grave. "I thank you for your time, Doctor," Daxton said. His voice was unnaturally calm. It was the calm that comes before a lightning strike. I stumbled back to the kitchen, staring out at the heat shimmering off the parched earth. Fallow ground. I was no different from the cracked, useless dirt beyond the fence. That night, Daxton didn't come to our bed. I lay awake listening to the coyotes cry, a sound that perfectly matched the desolation in my soul. He came into the room just before dawn, but he wasn't in his nightshirt. He was fully dressed, his face a mask of grim determination. "Get up, Nina," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "Get dressed. Wear something sturdy." A desperate, foolish flicker of hope sparked inside me. Was he taking me somewhere? To a specialist in Tucson? I dressed quickly, my hands fumbling with the buttons on my plainest dress. He led me outside, not to the wagon, but to two saddled horses. He handed me the reins of a gentle mare without a word. We rode out as the sun bled across the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. He rode ahead, a rigid silhouette against the growing light. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. He led me far from the familiar cattle trails, deep into the twisted rock canyons that everyone knew to be Apache territory. Fear, sharp and cold, finally pierced the numbness that had encased my heart. "Daxton, where are we going?" My voice was a dry croak. He pulled his horse to a halt in a narrow shadowed ravine. The rock walls rose up on either side of us like grasping hands. He dismounted and turned to face me. His expression was as hard and unyielding as the stone around us. "There have been talks," he said, his voice echoing in the confined space, "with Chaitin's band." Chaitin. The name was a curse in redemption. A Chiricahua leader who saw every white settler as a trespasser to be erased. "They want peace," Daxton continued, and the words sounded like poison on his tongue. "They want to guarantee their sacred grounds will be respected. They want a pact, sealed not with paper but with something binding." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw past the coldness in his eyes. I saw a terrifying fanaticism. This was a man justifying the unthinkable to himself. "What have you done?" I whispered, the reins slipping through my trembling fingers. "I have secured our future," he declared, his voice rising with a terrible, righteous energy. "My future, the ranch's future. Chaitin has guaranteed safe passage for my herds, undisturbed access to the northern springs. In exchange, he asked for a gesture of trust, a gift, something of value to me." The world tilted. The canyon walls seemed to press in, squeezing the air from my lungs. I finally understood. The sturdy dress, the long ride, this desolate, forsaken place. It wasn't a journey. It was a delivery. "Me?" The word was a gasp, stolen by the dry wind. "You have no purpose here anymore, Nina," he said, and the calm cruelty of it was worse than any shout. "You cannot give me a son. You cannot carry on my name. But you can do this. You can serve a purpose now. You will be the price of peace. They will see you, my wife, living among them, and they will know the Hayes Pact is true." "You can't," I sobbed, backing the horse away. "Daxton, please, I am your wife." "You are a barren wife," he roared, and the sound exploded in the canyon. The mask of calm was gone, replaced by 7 years of raw, festering rage. "You are fallow ground here. At least this way, your life will have meaning. You will buy my legacy." He lunged forward and grabbed the mare's bridle, his grip like iron. He yanked me from the saddle, and I tumbled to the dusty ground. He stood over me, his face twisted with a fury that made my blood run cold. "They will be here soon," he said, his voice dropping back to that chilling calm. "Do not try to run. There is nowhere to go. This is your new home. This is your new duty." He turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. He did not look back. I was left alone in the bottom of the ravine, the silence pressing in on me. I scrambled to my feet, my mind a storm of terror and disbelief. I was in a cage, left as bait. For 7 years I had lived in a quiet house, dreaming of a child's laughter. Now I was in a silence that was absolute, the silence of abandonment, the silence of the grave. I was no longer Nina Hayes, wife of a cattle baron. I was a thing to be traded, a ghost left to be claimed by the wilderness. And as the sun climbed higher, casting sharp, unforgiving shadows across the canyon floor, I heard it. A new sound. The soft, steady tread of moccasins on stone. They were coming. They didn't appear with whoops or war cries. They emerged from the rocks like shadows given form. There were 4 of them. Their skin was the color of fired clay, their black hair long and unbound. They moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. The one in the lead was broader in the shoulder, his face a roadmap of harsh sun and old battles. A web of scars covered one cheek, and his eyes, black, piercing, and utterly devoid of warmth, swept over me. He looked at me the way a man looks at a horse he's considering buying. This I knew was Chaitin. He grunted something in his own tongue, A younger warrior stepped forward and took my mare's reins. Another took my arm. His grip was firm but not brutal. He pulled me to my feet. I didn't resist. What was the point? The will to fight had been bleached out of me by Daxton's betrayal. I was a leaf caught in a river, my direction no longer my own. We walked for hours deeper and deeper into a labyrinth of stone. The sun beat down, and my town's shoes, built for the dusty streets of redemption, were shredded by the sharp rocks. My feet started to bleed, but I didn't cry out. A strange, cold numbness had settled over me. This had to be a nightmare. Soon I would wake up in my own bed. But I never did. The Apache camp was hidden in a wide bowl-shaped valley, a chaotic collection of wickiups, dome-shaped shelters made of branches and animal hides. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat, and a deep, earthy smell of life lived close to the ground. As they led me through the camp, dozens of faces turned to stare. Warriors, women, old men, naked children. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity, contempt, and raw, undisguised hatred. I was the enemy. I was the White Eye, a woman of the people who were stealing their land and killing their game. I kept my eyes fixed on the ground, the dust clinging to my tear-streaked face. I was shoved toward a small wickiup that stood slightly apart from the others. Chayton barked a command, and the warrior holding my arm pushed me inside. The interior was dark and smelled of stale air and old leather. He motioned for me to sit, then left, pulling a heavy hide over the entrance. I was plunged into almost total darkness, and that's where I stayed. Days bled into a meaningless cycle. Once a day, a grim-faced woman would bring me a bowl of thin corn mush and a gourd of water. The rest of the time, I was left alone with my thoughts, which were their own kind of torture. I replayed Daxton's cold face, his cruel words, the sound of his horse riding away, until the memories were worn smooth like stones in a river. After about a week, the hide was pulled back. Chayton stood there silhouetted against the bright day. He motioned for me to come out. My legs were stiff and weak. I stumbled into the light, blinking. He pointed to a pile of fresh buffalo hides, swarming with flies. Then he handed me a scraper, a sharpened piece of flint. The message was clear. My time as a gift was over. Now I was a slave. The work was brutal. My hands, accustomed to needlepoint and kneading dough, were soon raw and bleeding. The stench of the hides was nauseating. The other women worked nearby, their movements efficient and practiced. They ignored me. Their silence was a wall of condemnation. When I fumbled with the scraper, letting it slip and gouge a hide, one of them spat on the ground near my feet. I learned. I learned through pain and observation. I learned the rhythm of the work, the right angle to hold the scraper. I learned to ignore the fire in my muscles and the searing pain in my hands. In a strange way, the mindless physical labor was a mercy. It left no room for thought, no space for the crushing weight of my sorrow. And it was during this time that I first noticed him. He wasn't one of Chayton's loud, boisterous warriors. He was leaner, quieter. He often stood alone, watching the horizon, his posture relaxed but intensely alert. His face was more thoughtful than aggressive. Unlike the others who looked at me with either contempt or a crude curiosity, his gaze was different. It was neutral, assessing. He watched me work not with pity, but with a kind of detached interest, as if I were a strange new creature he was studying. One afternoon, I was struggling to haul a heavy bucket of water from the muddy spring. My foot slipped on a wet rock. I fell hard, the bucket clattering away, the precious water spilling into the dust. The other women laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that burned my cheeks hotter than the sun. I just sat there, my ankle throbbing, my dress soaked in mud, feeling the sting of helpless tears. I didn't hear him approach. A shadow fell over me. I looked up. It was him, the quiet one. He didn't offer me a hand. He didn't speak. He simply picked up the empty bucket, walked to the spring, filled it, and brought it back. He set it down beside me. Then he turned and walked away. It was the smallest of gestures, but in my world of unending hostility, it was monumental. It was the first act of grace I had received since Daxton had left me to die, and I clung to it like a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, There was something in this harsh world besides cruelty. A few days later, he did it again. I was grinding corn on a flat stone, my movements clumsy and exhausting. He walked past, paused, and then came and knelt opposite me. Without a word, he took a handful of corn and began to grind. His movements were fluid, powerful, using the weight of his body, not just his arms. He showed me how to rock the grinding stone, how to let its momentum do the work. I watched, mesmerized. Then I copied his rhythm. The work instantly became easier. He gave a single, curt nod and left. These wordless interactions became our language. He never spoke to me in front of the others, but his lessons continued. He would leave a piece of dried meat on a rock near where I worked. He would subtly point out which roots were edible when the women were sent to forage. He taught me, through silent demonstration, how to mend a tear in a hide with a bone all in sinew. And slowly I began to change. The physical hardship was sculpting me into someone new. My hands, once soft, became calloused and capable. The sun browned my skin. I lost the delicate roundness of my old life, my body becoming lean and wiry. But the biggest change was in my eyes. The terror was replaced by a watchful caution. The grief was still there, a hard kernel deep inside, but it was now encased in a shell of pure, stubborn resilience. I started to understand their language, not by being taught, but by listening. I learned the words for water, fire, meat, danger. I learned the names of the people who despised me. I learned to read the moods of the camp, to make myself small and invisible when Chayton was in a rage. I was no longer Nina Hayes, the barren wife. That woman had died in the canyon. I was a survivor. And in the silent, observant gaze of the quiet warrior, I saw the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Respect. His name, I would soon learn, was Cale, and he didn't see a white woman or a slave or a traded good. He saw someone who was, against all odds, learning to endure. But our silent understanding was about to be put to the test, and I had no idea that his small acts of kindness would soon put both our lives in grave danger. The harsh Arizona winter descended, bringing a biting wind that sliced through my worn dress. The Apache were prepared, reinforcing their wickiups, their mood growing more grim as resources became scarce. It was during these cold, lean months that the silent language between me and Cale began to find a voice. His lessons became more direct, always conducted away from the prying eyes of the camp. "Not that one," he said one day, his voice low. It was the first full sentence he had ever spoken to me in English. His accent was thick, the words chosen carefully. He pointed to a branch of deceptively bright berries I was about to gather. "Sky gift, looks like food. It is sleep with no waking." I dropped the branch as if it were a hot coal. How do you know English?" I asked, my voice raspy from disuse. A shadow passed over his face. "A man I killed, long ago. He spoke much before he died." The statement was brutal in its simplicity, a stark reminder of the world I now inhabited. Yet he continued to teach me. He taught me the names of the constellations, which he called the sky people. He showed me how to find north by the sun and the moss on the rocks. He taught me which animal tracks meant danger and which meant a possible meal. In turn, I began to understand him. Kyle was an outsider in his own way. He was respected for his skill as a scout, but he held himself apart, a man wrapped in a quiet sorrow. One evening, as a rare thin snow dusted the canyon rim, we shared the small heat of a fire I'd built in a sheltered alcove. The wind howled above us, creating a small bubble of intimacy. "Why do you help me?" I asked, the question that had been burning inside me for months. He stared into the flames for a long time. "I see a bird with a broken wing that learns to walk," he finally said. "It is a strong thing to see." "I'm not strong," I said, the words a bitter confession. "I am what my husband called me, fallow ground." The shame of it still clung to me. Kyle looked at me, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "A man who names his wife after dirt is a man who fears the sky," he said, the words a strange kind of poetry. "He looks only down. He never sees the hawk." And then he told me a story. He spoke of his wife, Nalan, and his young son, Taza. They hadn't died from a soldier's bullet. They had died in a winter much colder than this one, from a sickness of the lungs brought on by starvation. The desire for a strong son, for a warrior to carry my name, it was a fire in my heart, he said, poking the embers with a stick. When Taz's breath faded and Nalan followed him 2 suns later, the fire went out. It left only ash. He looked up at me, his gaze intense. The spirits give life. The spirits take it away. A man's name is written on the wind, not on a son's face. To want a child only to see yourself live on. It is a chain. It binds you to the fear of ending. His words hit me like a physical blow. Daxton's obsession, the town's judgment, my own crippling shame. It was all born of that same fear, the fear of being forgotten. Kyle, through his own immeasurable loss, had found a different kind of freedom, but our growing bond did not go unnoticed. A woman named Tyan, one of Chaitin's younger wives, watched us with eyes like chips of obsidian. She was fierce and jealous, and she saw the respect Kale showed the white woman as a personal insult. The sabotage started small. Snares I set would be mysteriously empty. Pouches of herbs I gathered would vanish. Then one day it escalated. A valuable medicine pouch belonging to the camp's elderly shaman went missing, and Tyan began to whisper. "The white woman is bad luck," she hissed to the other women, loud enough for me to hear. "She has a hole inside her where a soul should be. She takes things to try and fill it." The accusation was deadly serious. Stealing from the shaman was a grave offense. Chaitin, his face a thundercloud, dragged me into the center of the camp. The entire tribe gathered, their faces hostile mass. "Where is it?" Chaitin demanded in his language, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "I didn't take it," I pleaded, shaking my head. "I know nothing of it." Tyan stepped forward, a smug, cruel look on her face. "She hides it in her sleeping robes. I saw her." 2 warriors moved toward my sleeping place, a simple pile of hides and a shared wickiup. Panic seized me. I was being framed. My word meant nothing. This was it. This was how I would die. "Stop!" The voice was calm, but it cut through the tension with undeniable authority. Kyle stepped into the circle. He stood between me and the warriors. All eyes turned to him. "Tyan lies," Kale said, his gaze fixed on Chaitin. He didn't even look at the woman who had accused me. Tyan shrieked with outrage. "He is bewitched by her. The white witch has clouded his eyes." Kale ignored her. "I was on the high ridge this morning," he continued, speaking only to Chaitin. "I saw Tyan near the shaman's wickiup. Then I saw her go to the place where the outlanders throw their trash." He turned his head and pointed toward a deep crevasse outside the camp, a refuse pit. "The pouch is there. She threw it, hoping to cast blame." Chaitin's eyes narrowed, shifting from Kale to his fuming wife. He barked an order. A young warrior scurried off toward the crevasse. The camp held its breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. Kyle had put himself in immense danger. To accuse the leader's wife was a direct challenge to the leader himself. If he was wrong, they might kill him alongside me. After a few agonizingly long minutes, the warrior returned. In his hand, he held the shaman's medicine pouch, smudged with dirt. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Tyan's face went pale. Chaitin's face became a terrifying mask of fury. He turned slowly toward his wife. He didn't shout. He spoke a few quiet, venomous words to her. Then he backhanded her across the face with such force that she spun to the ground. He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate contempt, and strode away. The crowd dispersed, leaving Tyan sobbing in the dust. Cal looked at me. His face was impassive, but his eyes confirmed our new reality. He hadn't just taught me to survive. He had defended my life at the risk of his own. Our alliance was no longer a secret. It was a truth declared before the entire tribe. That night, for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than fear. I felt safe, but I was a fool. Safety was an illusion, and the world was about to remind me of that in the most brutal way possible. The fuse had been lit. An explosion was coming, and it was going to start with news from the outside world. News that would change everything. The snows melted and the desert bloomed with a brief, violent explosion of color. A fragile peace settled over the canyons, but it was about to be shattered. A patrol of Mexican traders arrived, their mules laden with salt, cloth, and iron goods. They brought something else too. News. Their leader, a leathery man named Mateo, spoke passable English and Apache, as Kyle and Chayton negotiated for rifle cartridges. I lingered nearby, pretending to sort through bolts of cheap cotton, my ears straining to catch every word. "That big rancher, Hayes," Mateo said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "He is a man of rising fortunes. Took a new wife, not 3 months past. A young thing from up near the Gila River, daughter of another rich man." The world, which had just begun to feel solid under my feet, dissolved into a dizzying vortex. A new wife. But Mateo wasn't finished. He delivered the final, killing blow. "They say she is already swelling with child. A new wife, pregnant." The words were hammer blows to my chest. He hadn't just replaced me. He had succeeded. He had erased me so completely, it was as if I had never existed. The last stubborn ember of the woman I used to be, the part that still, in its most secret heart, felt the sting of a wife betrayed, flared into a roaring inferno of pure, cold rage. This wasn't grief. The time for grief was long past. This was something harder, something sharper. It was the final severing of a rotten cord. I was truly free of him, and that liberation felt terrifyingly fierce. Cal glanced at me as Mateo spoke. He saw the color drain from my face, saw it replaced by a chilling, stony resolve in my eyes. He knew without a single word being spoken that this news had changed everything. The reckoning I had never dared to dream of was suddenly within my grasp, and it came sooner than I could have imagined. Daxton Hayes, arrogant in his new life, his legacy now secured in the womb of his new wife, Amelia, made a fatal mistake. The pact he'd made with Chayton was one of convenience. With a son on the way and the political alliance of his new father-in-law, he no longer saw the need to honor it. When Chayton's warriors went to collect the agreed-upon tribute, a small share of the calves born that spring, Daxton's men met them with rifles. 2 of Chayton's youngest warriors were shot dead. The news hit the camp like a lightning strike. Chayton's rage was biblical. He painted his face for war, his voice a roar of vengeance that echoed through the valley. This wasn't just a broken promise. It was an unforgivable insult. He would not just raid the Hayes Ranch, he would burn it to the ground. He would salt the earth and erase the Hayes name from the land forever. And to do it, he realized he had the perfect weapon. That night, he summoned me to his wickiup. Cale stood outside, his arms crossed, his face a grim mask in the firelight. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and fury. Chayton stood over a crude map of the Double H, drawn in the dirt. "You know this place," he snarled, jabbing a finger at the circle that represented the Hayes homestead. "You know the house, the barns, where the guards stand, where they sleep. You will guide us." It wasn't a request, it was a command. And in that moment, I felt a surge of dark, terrible power. Here it was, the chance to make Daxton feel even a fraction of the desolation he had inflicted upon me. Vengeance was a bitter cup offered to me, and my soul was thirsty. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "I will guide you." When I emerged from the wickiup, Kyle was waiting. The moon cast long shadows, making his face hard to read. "This path is a dark one, Nina," he said quietly. "Vengeance is a fire that burns the one who holds it." "He left me to die," I countered, my voice trembling with a cold fury. "He erased me. He built his new life on my bones. Let him burn." "And the new wife?" Kyle asked, his voice soft but piercing. "The child she carries? Are they part of your fire too?" His question was a bucket of ice water on the flames of my rage. Amelia, a girl from the Gila River, a girl who was likely just as much a pawn in a man's world as I had been, and her child, an innocent. The ghost of my own deepest longing rose up to haunt me. I wanted to destroy Daxton's legacy, not slaughter a woman and her unborn baby. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Not them." I looked at Cale, my mind racing, a perilous and sharp idea beginning to form. I could have my revenge, but I could shape it. I could be the architect of Daxton's ruin, not just a participant in a massacre. I could make it surgical. "I will guide them," I told Cale, my eyes locking with his. "But you must trust me." I went back to Chayton. I knelt by the dirt map. My voice was confident, my knowledge precise. I described the layout of the ranch in intimate detail. I pointed out the new large barn where Daxton stored his winter feed and his most valuable tack. I noted the bunkhouse where his hired gun slept. I described the holding pens for his prize bull and breeding stock. And then I lied. The main house has been fortified, I said, drawing a new line in the dirt with my finger. He brought in stonemasons. The windows are barred. There are rifle ports. He keeps his new wife locked in the root cellar during any sign of trouble. To attack it directly would be a waste of men. You would lose too many before you ever breach the door. I looked Chatton directly in the eye, letting him see the hatred I felt. His wealth, his pride, it's not in that house. It's in his herds, his bull, his barns. Burn his assets, scatter his cattle, and you take his future. You leave him with nothing but a fortified box and a pregnant wife he can no longer afford to feed. You leave him a king of an ash heap. Chayton studied my face, his black eyes searching for any hint of deceit. But all he saw was the burning, pure conviction of a woman wronged. My logic was sound. My hatred was a thing he could understand. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He liked the poetry of it. To leave the man alive but utterly ruined was a more profound vengeance than a quick death. It will be as you say, he declared. We ride at dusk tomorrow. As the war party prepared, their chilling chants echoing through the canyon, I found Cale checking the fletching on his arrows. It is done, I said quietly. I've aimed the arrow. I can only pray it flies true. Cale looked up at me, his expression unreadable. An arrow once loosed, he said, follows its own path on the wind. He was right, and I had just unleashed a storm. The raid began as a whisper, a slithering of shadows from the northern bluffs where the ranch's defenses were thinnest. I watched from a high ridge, the coarse granite digging into my hands. Cal was beside me, a silent silhouette against the starlit sky. Below us, the Double H Ranch lay sleeping, a place that was once my entire world, now just a tactical map in my memory, a knot of ice and fire coiled in my stomach. This was it, the culmination of my rage, the final answer to Daxton's betrayal. Then the whispers became a roar. Torches, held low until the last moment, bloomed into existence like malevolent flowers. Just as I'd planned, they weren't aimed at the main house. They were flung into the massive, timber-frame barns and the long, low bunkhouse. Dry wood caught with a hungry whoosh. Within moments, the night was torn open by fire and sound. Splintering timber, the panicked screams of horses, the terrified bellowing of trapped cattle. The smell of burning hay and pine, the scent of acrid justice rose to our perch. I felt a grim, terrible satisfaction. I was watching the heart of Daxton's empire turn to incandescent orange and black smoke. This wasn't a blind massacre. This was the surgical dismantling of a man's legacy, the very thing he had traded me for. Let him watch it burn. Let him feel the heat of his own ruin. But as the chaos swelled, the clean lines of my vengeance began to blur. The fire was alive, indiscriminate. The sounds were not just of destruction, but of abject terror. I had unleashed this. The cold knowledge of my own power was a heavy, suffocating thing. And then, everything changed. The front door of the main house was thrown open, spilling yellow lamplight into the maelstrom. A broad-shouldered figure charged into the yard. Daxton. He wasn't cowering as I'd imagined. He was incandescent with a fury that matched the fires around him, a repeating rifle held at his hip. And clinging to the doorframe behind him, her face a pale oval of terror in the flickering light, was his new wife, Amelia. My breath caught in my throat. She was so young. Her blonde hair, unbound, seemed to catch the firelight like a halo of panic. This was the woman who had taken my place, the vessel for the air I could never provide. And she looked utterly, horrifyingly fragile. Daxton began firing, his shots wild and useless against the fast-moving shadows, roaring words that were lost in the din. Seeing him again, not as my husband but as this raging, cornered animal, I felt not fear, but a profound, chilling pity. He was a king raging alone in his crumbling kingdom. His presence, however, was an unplanned disruption. The raid's discipline fractured. A trio of Chaitin's younger warriors, their blood hot with victory and cheap whiskey, broke away from the burning barns. They let out a unified whooping cry and turned their attention to the real prize, the rancher himself. Their knives gleamed in the firelight. My surgical strike was about to become a slaughter. "No," I whispered, the word lost in the roar. Kyle put a steadying hand on my shoulder, but it was too late. The dam of my control broke. This wasn't my plan. My revenge was on Daxton's pride, not his life, and it was not on the terrified woman in the doorway or the innocent child she carried. The thought of that life being extinguished in this inferno of my making was unbearable. Propelled by an instinct I didn't know I possessed, I scrambled down the rocky incline, loose stones skittering away from my feet. "Nina!" Kel's voice was a sharp warning behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran, my Apache-made moccasins silent on the hard-packed earth, straight toward the center of the storm I had created. I reached the edge of the ranch yard just as the warriors cornered Daxton near the stone well. His rifle was empty. He was panting, his eyes wide with the primal fear of a trapped animal. He saw me then, emerging from the shadows into the hellish light. His jaw went slack. The fury on his face collapsed into utter, soul-shaking disbelief. "Nina," he croaked, the name a ghost on his lips. He stumbled back a step, as if he had seen an apparition rise from the grave he dug for her. You're with them." The warriors paused, their attack thrown off by this bizarre tableau. In that momentary silence, my voice, though shaking, cut through the crackle of the flames. "You left me in the dirt, Daxton," I said, each word heavy with the weight of 7 years. "You planted nothing. You harvest nothing." His mind, unable to process the reality of my survival, my betrayal, simply snapped. All his fear, his loss, his humiliation, coalesced into one burning point of rage directed at me. If he was going to die, he would drag this specter of his failure into the fire with him. With a guttural roar, he dropped the useless rifle and lunged. He never reached me. There was a soft hiss, almost too quiet to hear in the din, followed by a solid thump. Daxton screamed, a high, strangled sound, and staggered back. An arrow protruded from the thick muscle of his shoulder, its dark feather fletching stark against his white shirt. I looked past him. Kyle stood 20 yards away, a bow in his hand, his expression calm and focused. He hadn't killed. He had simply ended the fight. Daxton crumpled to the ground, moaning. The fight was over. The warriors, seeing the moment lost, let out frustrated yells and melted back toward the chaos. Amelia finally broke from her paralysis at the doorway. She ran across the yard and fell to her knees beside Daxton, her small hands hovering over his wound. She looked up at me, her blue eyes wide, not just with terror, but with a dawning, pitiable confusion. And in that instant, looking down at the weeping girl who had taken my place, I felt the last embers of my vengeance die, leaving behind only the cold, bitter taste of ash. There was no victory here. There was only a circle of pain, and I was standing in the center of it. This girl wasn't my rival. She was another victim of Daxton's obsession. Cal was suddenly at my side, his grip firm on my arm. "It is done, Nina," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We must go. Now." He pulled me back toward the shadows, away from the smoldering ruins of my past and the fresh grief of the present. As we disappeared into the darkness, I took one last look back. I saw Daxton Hayes, the great cattle baron, brought low in the dirt of his own yard, his empire in flames, his new wife weeping over him, and his old wife, the ghost he thought he'd buried, walking away into the night. The fire had burned my past to the ground, but I had no idea what was about to rise from the ashes. The ride back to the canyon was a silent, grim affair. The triumphant whoops of the returning warriors grated on my nerves. The victory felt tainted, hollow. I hadn't found justice. I had just traded one kind of destruction for another. The consequences came swiftly. The Double H wasn't just any ranch. Daxton's new father-in-law was a powerful man, and he screamed for blood. The cavalry, once a sporadic patrol, descended upon the territory with the focused fury of a stirred hive of hornets. The canyons, once a sanctuary, became a death trap. Every shadow could hold a blue-coated soldier. The hunting parties returned empty-handed, or not at all. Fear, thick and sour, permeated the camp. Less than 2 weeks later, the final blow came. A scout, breathless and bleeding, stumbled into camp with the news. A cavalry patrol had ambushed Chaitin and his personal guard in a narrow pass. There were no survivors. The news shattered the band. Without Chaitin's iron will, old feuds erupted. The camp fractured into paranoid, starving factions, and their fear and rage needed a target. All eyes turned to me, the white woman, the omen of ill fortune, and to Kale, the scout who had protected me. That night, as whispers of blame turned to open threats, Kyle led me away from the disintegrating camp. He took me up a winding, hidden path to a secret cave, tucked behind a shimmering curtain of water from a mountain spring. The air inside was cool and clean, a stark contrast to the fear-choked valley below. He had been preparing for this. Blankets, water skins, and parcels of dried meat were neatly stacked against a wall. "We cannot stay," he said, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "This land is now soaked in blood. There is no peace here." I sank onto a blanket, the strength draining from my limbs. The raid, Daxton's ruined face, Chaitin's death, the hungry eyes in the camp. It all crashed down on me. I had won my revenge, but I had lost everything else. "He called me fallow ground," I whispered, the words raw and broken, confessing the deepest wound in my soul. For 7 years, that was my name, my worth, an empty field, a broken tool. It's why he threw me away. I hugged my knees to my chest, the sobs I had suppressed for so long finally breaking free. And I became as barren and hateful as he believed me to be. Cal sat across from me, his presence a quiet anchor in my storm of grief. He let me cry until the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. Then he spoke, his voice a low, gentle murmur that seemed to push back the darkness. "When Nalin and I were joined," he began, his gaze distant, "I did not pray for a son to carry my name or prove my strength. I prayed for a partner to walk beside me. Tasa," his voice softened at the name of his lost child, "he was a gift, a beautiful, unexpected star in our sky. I loved him more than breath, but my life, my foundation, was Nalin. She was the one who stood with me when the winter wind was a blade. Her hand was the one I held when the summer sun was a hammer." He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto mine, willing me to understand. "A son is an arrow you fire into the future, never knowing where it will land. A partner. A partner is the one who stands with you while you draw the bow. She is the one who steadies your aim. The legacy of a person is not the blood they pass on, like a deed to land. It is the life they build, the kindness they show, the warmth they share in a cold world." He paused, letting the words settle in the quiet cave. "Daxton Hayes did not lose a son in you, Nina. He lost a wife. He threw away the one person who stood by him. He was the one who was barren. His heart was a field of stone. His words were a revelation, a key unlocking a prison I had been trapped in for 7 years. Tears streamed down my face again, but they were not tears of shame. They were tears of cleansing, washing away the poison of Daxton's judgment and my own self-hatred. Cale hadn't seen a failed mother or an empty womb. He had seen me, my strength, my pain, my spirit. He reached across the small space, and with a gentleness that belied his calloused hands, wiped a tear from my cheek. His touch was not one of pity, but of profound, shared understanding. "There are stories," he said softly, "from the old ones, of a valley to the north, far beyond the painted desert. A place the war has not yet touched. They say the water runs sweet from the mountains and the game is plentiful. It is a long journey, a hard one." He wasn't commanding or demanding. He was offering a possibility, a flicker of hope in a world consumed by darkness. I looked at him, this quiet, wounded man who had shown me more kindness than any of my own people. A man who had seen value in me where I had seen only failure. I was no longer Nina Hayes. I was not the Apache slave. I was a woman who had walked through fire and with his help, had refused to be consumed by it. My future was not an echo of my past. It was an untrodden path, stretching out before me. My voice when I spoke was steady and clear for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Will you walk beside me, Kale? A rare, small smile touched the corners of his mouth, reaching his eyes and transforming his weary face. It is the only path I wish to walk. Before the first hint of dawn, we slipped out from behind the waterfall's misty veil. Two solitary figures, turning our backs on the blood-soaked canyons and the ashes of our former lives. We had nothing but what we could carry and a shared unspoken promise. We headed north, not toward a guaranteed sanctuary, but toward a choice. A chance to build a life defined not by bloodlines or legacies, but by the simple, radical act of two people walking side by side into the unknown. Together. The story of Nina and Kale isn't one you'll find in any history book. It's a powerful reminder that worth is not something that can be given or taken away by others. Nina was cast out for what she couldn't provide, only to find a man who cherished her for who she was. A man who understood that a true legacy isn't about creating an echo of yourself, but about building a life with a partner who stands with you against the storm. Their journey shows us that true strength isn't just about enduring pain, but about having the courage to walk away from the ashes and choose a new path, a new tribe, and a new definition of family. If this story of resilience and unexpected love resonated with you, do us a favor and hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story with real heart. And for more deep dives into the dramatic, untold stories of our past, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Thank you for listening.